I'm Paul Owens, opinions editor of the Orlando Sentinel. Today I'm here with the CEO of Florida Tax Watch, Dominic Calabro, and we've got a dozen questions for Dominic. Welcome.
Hi, Paul. Thank you.
For our viewers who are unaware of Tax Watch, could you give us just a brief description of what you do?
Well, Florida Tax Watch is a scientific research institute. It's really the eyes and ears of the taxpayers. We're not the voice of the taxpayers. We say their representatives or senators are, or their elected representatives. But Tax Watch is really a watchdog, guide dog, bird dog, not a lap dog, to look out for the long-term interests of the taxpayers of Florida. We spend a lot of our time not just, certainly not anti-tax or anti-government, but while we know most Floridians don't like to increase their taxes, we try to find ways that we can get more value out of spending. So we look at how we can improve how we spend money in our schools, so we improve the academic achievement of our students. We look to see how we can improve the safety of our roads and highways, economic policies, things like that. So we spend a lot of time focusing on how state and local governments in Florida can spend the taxpayers' hard-earned money better.
And how long have you been doing this?
I can't get another job, Paul. Honestly, I just finished my 35th year, and the group is now, the institution is 36 years old. So it was actually founded by a very well-known former state senator who recently passed away, God rest his soul, Senator Kenny Plant from Oviedo, Florida, also a Republican, and his Democratic counterpart. So we've always been nonpartisan or bipartisan. It was Phil Lewis, former Senate president from West Palm Beach. And of course, the big organizers were the founders of Winn-Dixie, J.E. Davis, Winn-Dixie Stores, and Public Supermarkets, Mr. George Schenken, and Mark Hollis of Publix as well. So we've got a long-standing foundation of helping serve the taxpayers of Florida. So we do things like look at the Constitution, statutory law, how we can improve state government spending. We do the annual budget turkey watch to kind of make sure there's some budget integrity. But the whole thing is always make sure that what we do is instructive and constructive, not destructive. So it's trying to build a better Florida through our fiscal policies and how we spend the taxpayers' hard-earned money.
Mm-hmm. And where do you get your funding from?
A variety of sources, partly required of the 501c3. It's all voluntary contributions. Companies, individuals, philanthropic foundations, families, small businesses, associations, organizations. We don't really receive the money from state or local governments in Florida or the federal government. Is
it sometimes you'll see the shorthand in print that Tax Watch is a business-backed think tank? Is that a fair?
It's partial. It's not entirely, because we get a lot of money from foundations and from individuals. So it looks like we're just simply pushing the business agenda. We're actually pushing the taxpayers' agenda. There's often alignment, but not always. So we're always looking out for the taxpayers. And we'll look at any given issue, which would distinguish us from others. They may look at what's good for the owners. We're looking at what's good for the customers. And it may be a subtle, but it's an important distinction. That really makes what we do, first and foremost, of the public or common weal public interest.
And over the 35 years that you've been doing this, or the 36 years the organization has been around, what are some of the highlights in terms of accomplishments?
Wow, we were just briefly before on camera talking about one. In 1994, Tax Watch saw that there was a lot of proposed amendments to the Constitution. We thought we were going to start using the state constitution as kind of statutes. And so we called for changing that to get to 60%. It took 12 years. Took 2006, and we were helpful, very instrumental in doing that with some other organizations. And because of that, requiring a 60% threshold, we think we've avoided some really harmful things. One was a proposal to, which we think would have shut down any kind of residential commercial development. Hometown democracy would have really stifled economic growth for all communities, especially the burgeoning growth we've seen here in Orlando and the Orlando area. So that's one. I think all this is that over the years, Tax Watch has helped save, it's easy to say over $9 billion, not 79, $7 to $9 billion that we could easily track in the last few years. Just the last 5 years alone, it's close to $5.5 billion. So creating things that are better. Last but not least, we have this incredible awards program, which again, not anti-government, but how do we have better government? We actually have a program called the, started out as the Davis Productivity Awards, now Prudential Productivity Awards from TaxWatch, that recognizes, rewards, and seeks to replicate excellence of our state government employees and work units. Just like it works in business and nonprofit organizations, you reward and recognize and replicate the best. And so these are men and women that help save money, improve the quality of services in good times as well as during hurricanes and challenging times, and help elevate the human spirit by doing things that are really valuable to the taxpayers of Florida. So it's looking at how can we build and encourage really good things in government. We don't run government, but like the BASF commercial, we help run government, help it run better.
You mentioned briefly the budget turkeys. Let's talk about that a little more, because that's one of the things that you're best known for. Tell us how you come up with the turkey list every year, and what's been the result of your putting out that list of turkeys every year.
Paul, we've been, actually we didn't come up with the term, it's been actually a long term that has got some, the lexicon goes way back several decades. We started doing it, the first time we did it was 1983, didn't do it in 84, 85, did it again in 86, and then we called it Turkey Watch, Budget Turkey Watch in 1986. What that is a way of looking at the process, the state budget process. And that's the outcome, that's the product. Although it's a very small part of what we do, I mean probably less than 5% of what we do and publish, it's very pronounced because it actually has consequences. It kind of is like truth to power. It calls, our state's top leaders, particularly the powerful politicians, when they budget things outside the very processes that would lend towards competition, accountability, budget integrity, and a process that they've established so that people can make good judgments about better spending. So, for example, when an item has not been vetted by the executive branch or by the House or Senate committees or the House and Senate full House, okay, they go to conference. The whole idea of conference is where the House passes its budget, the Senate passes its budget, and they conference. And really it's between the chairman of two appropriation committees. And they basically swap papers. And they swapped 19 pages at the last minute that added to some $300 million worth of project that had, many of which were in neither budget at all. So historically, the conference was to hammer out differences, not to add to. So that's $300 million that was not put towards teacher salaries, that was not put towards economic development and growth, that was not put towards even social services or Medicaid for poorer folks, or even tax cuts. So it was put towards parochial things. And one thing that Alexis de Tocqueville, observer philosopher from France, when he came over and looked at the early Americas in the 1820s, he said two things to be careful of: hyperdemocracy and parochialism. And so that this process is kind of a very parochial. And when legislators swear to uphold the Constitution of the United States, the state of Florida, they're also looking at what's best for the commonweal, all the taxpayers, not just, yes, they have to look out for their community. But what would you think if someone says, hey, I like my local community's high school, so I want to just pop them an extra $10 million. What would that do to the Florida Education Financing Program? What would that do to budget integrity? What would that do to a sense of fairness? And now a lot of legislators themselves are saying, because you got that, I've been waiting, getting these items funded, vetted properly, going through the proper process, waiting a long time, making sure they're accountable, and these things devoid of that. So we point them out. Their track record, and one time, sometimes you get a kind of hue and cry over it, is that governors, Democrats and Republicans alike, have vetoed upwards of 90% of those on our list. This year, I think it was about 85 or 86%. Of course, the governor vetoed far more. The beauty of it, what TaxWatch does, is it focuses on what, not who, so we don't play partisan games if it's a Democrat or Republican. Usually it's the party in power. It's going to be generally more than not. But we don't, if it went through the process, like a lot of items that the governor did veto, we said no, that it went through the process. So in some ways, if the governor more closely followed our list, there'd only be maybe just a little less than 200 million veto, not the 600 million that was vetoed. So it's about process, about integrity, about standards. And through the years, especially Governor Graham, Martinez, Childs, Bush, and now Scott, have been using the policies the Office of Planning and Budgeting basically use, and if you read the veto message, they're often tracking the language that we have helped develop. Now, what's the good of it? Well, it has helped For example, Governor Vito Corleone,
Yes.
Jeb Bush as governor, he said if he was on the tax watch list, it was dead on arrival. But more importantly, what it did is it allowed him to set aside $2 billion, okay, of the $7 billion that he left the state of Florida when he left. Let me tell you, when we hit that serious Great Recession, Governor Charlie Crist and the legislature spent that $7 billion in like about 2 years. So that's a good thing. That puts money aside. 2, it ensures budget integrity and fairness. Okay. 3, it adds to accountability. But the other thing is it helps develop policies and procedures that can be sprung forth from it. For example, there used to be a lot of these local funded historic preservation programs and grants. They were just sent out willy-nilly. Well, because of the tax watch list maybe over 25, 30 years ago, and legislators got frustrated and said, look, let's just have a process. So they created this process where it goes to this review. Any community can make a request to restore their county courthouse or these facilities that it's a legitimate role of government. And they'll set aside and they'll rank order them in priority based on some reasonable basis. Okay? And then if they have $15 million for that purpose, then the first numbers of project up $150,000 to $300,000 that equal $15 million get funded. Anything over that, so they develop by statute and by laws processes that were not in place beforehand. The whole idea is to say, look, this is our government. It's the hard-earned taxpayers' money. It's not the special interest money. It's not our legislators' money. And as they run for office, they say, this is your hard-earned money, and we're going to spend that wisely. So this is a means by which we help the state legitimize what it does and get more value and accountability and transparency and integrity to the budget process.
What else is on the list of budget reforms? You just referred to one, but what needs to be done at the front end so that you have fewer turkeys at the back end?
The first and foremost important thing, because it's happened on 3 different times where there were no budget turkeys. 2 with Governor Childs. First time it occurred in 1991, then in 92. It did occur also under Governor Jeb Bush. I forget what year, 2003 or 4. Is a commitment. You know, we're going to do it the right way. And what happens is once members say, well, you know, we're going to set aside a turkey pot, or we're going to set aside a, you know, hometown member project pot, then Katie bar the doors. That's kind of what happens. But if they say, no, listen, we're going to put the money towards teacher salaries. We're going to put the money towards outstanding principals. We're going to put the money towards economic development growth or tax cuts. And we're going to be serious about it. And our actions are going to follow our words. Then and then only do you really find that. The second thing that Tax Watch really is pushing is we put out a guide recently, budget guide, and showed that millions of dollars through the years have been swept. I call it sweeping, of trust funds. And so we want to put trust back into the trust funds where there's a legitimate relationship. I mean, there's some trust funds that are just checking accounts, and they just are there to transfer money because of governmental fund accounting. But what we wanted to say, look, if you're going to have to move a fund, and sometimes you have to, then have a bill specifically designated to do that that tells everybody up front, look, we're going to make this exception for this reason, it's a compelling reason, rather than do it kind of like a backroom kind of deal. We think that'll add a little bit a greater margin of accountability, a little bit more honesty, a little bit more integrity. Again, people have to pay their taxes. If they don't pay their taxes, they'll go to jail. They have a rightful expectation that legislators are going to be respectful with that money. And this just helps provide those guidances to ensure that's more likely to happen.
One of the things that I'm familiar with that you do every year is come up with a report on efficiencies that could save money in the way that government operates. Is that going to be, is that underway for this session coming up? And what can we expect?
Yes, we've had as much as almost a 60% implementation rate. And some of the changes, one year we had almost $2 billion worth of the savings through having state employees contribute and Florida retirement system employees contribute to their retirements. We were one of only 2 states, 1 or 2 states in the nation that didn't contribute anything. So the contribution of 3% amounted to about $2 billion savings and improved the actuarial well-being of the Florida retirement system too. But this year, every 4 years, the Constitution now requires that there's a thing called a Government Efficiency Commission. So Florida Tax Watch and its Center for Government Efficiency is now working a little bit more closely with Governor Scott, Senate President Andy Gardner, and House Speaker Steve Crisafulli on this Government Efficiency Task Force. So we've got a good number of members there. We're going to put a lot of our emphasis on that. So we hope to save, I'm just one of the voting members. It's just advisory. And so we hope to offer substantial savings that could be enacted in 2016, but probably more likely 17 and 18. So we've got a 2 or 3 year implementation rate. Because it's really easy to stop stuff from happening, it's really hard to make improvements and innovations happen. You say, well, why? I'll give you a perfect example. Many years ago, TaxWatch said, hey, you could save money, and now everyone does it all the time with low flow shower heads.
Right.
Okay? You save something like 75% water, 80% electricity. So who could be against that? The companies that were selling the old non-high flow shower heads. And so these silly things like that, this, someone's innovation can be keeping someone's largesse from happening. And making change is always difficult. But what we've been able to do is say, look, here's enlightened self-interest, here's things, and don't get upset with TaxWatch. Explain your actions to the voters, to the taxpayers. This is their money. It's not mine, it's their money. And so with that, and of course, we've got good relations with the media and also a lot of organizations that will benefit by these proposed changes. So that's going to be a big effort. We hope to offer several $1 billion in workable. We've also got some great legislators on that panel. Representative Dan Rolson, we've got Representative Broder, we've got Senator Jeff Brandes. I think there's one or two other members that I think will, say here's something real specific that they can work with. So we want to make sure there's a good balance. And you have to ultimately have a lot of push from outside as well as some welcoming inside to make these changes. Let's say we could offer, we'd like a long-term strategy saying, look, when the state of Florida is growing, let's say the growth in new revenue is going to be $1 billion. We'd like to say, why don't you also match that with $1 billion of cost innovations, not cost cutting, which might cost you more money by cutting something that's necessary, and like cutting immunizations will cost the community great deals of money and a lot of bad health. So we want to make sure you have innovations that do it smarter, better, faster. And by doing that, if you could match it, then think about all of a sudden you have now $2 billion to invest in schools, education, healthcare, universities, things that will really be generative and grow communities and really add value over the long term. So it's a smart way. It's saying, look, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Have smart ways of growing your revenues that are acceptable to the voters, but also use innovation as you're doing here in your own shop, and as your listeners have to do, and as how can we do things better and differently than we did before, or else you get run over.
Right. Some breaking news this week. The latest estimate from the state's economist is that legislators who meet for their regular session in January are going to have $600 million surplus, I believe, to work with. Does that come in about where you expected? Is it lower than you thought, higher than you thought?
Well, that's above and beyond what they've already expected. So they're expecting an increase as well. This is $617 million on top of that. But I'm going to use an example. It's like a Like's hot dog. It's gone. I mean, as soon as that hit the bricks, it's hit the streets. There's going to be a lot of claimed interest on that money because the needs of the people are always far greater than the revenues available to fund it, even at a virtually $80 billion annual budget. The wants and needs, the wants, let alone the wants and needs, are billions of dollars more than that. So, and that's the purpose of the budget process, is to kind of ferret out. There's no real scientific method, but by having a budget process that's transparent, government sunshine, but transparent, but also lends itself to, okay, of all these competing programs in social services, child welfare, university spending, how do we make sure we don't unruly or improperly duplicate, okay, but spend the money in areas that will generally give the better result and be accountable for impacting people's lives in a positive way. So some of the areas we're going to be focusing in on will be things in smart justice, how we can improve public safety, reduce the dependence on what I call prisons or crime colleges, where a lot of these, particularly first-time offenders or low-level criminal activity, nonviolent criminal activity, is often rewarded by learning how to commit better crimes. So when they get out, if we don't help them get job skills, education, training, drug treatment, they may go right back to a life of crime. Doing that, they commit 6 to 7 crimes, hurting people and property in Florida, and costing us untold hundreds of millions of dollars. So we'd like to break that cycle. We have been doing it, seeing it in other states. Tax Watch is leading the charge in that regard, as among some other areas as well.
Mm-hmm. We have, I think, we're on track to exceed 100 million visitors this year in Florida, and Central Florida particularly depends on tourism. How can we continue to benefit from that without falling into the same kind of boom-bust cycle that's hurt us so badly in the past when we've had, the recession, the 9/11 shock?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of policies does Tax Watch advocate for reaping the benefits of tourism yet diversifying the economy?
I think we're doing a lot to try to diversify the economy and the biosciences and the like. I think you're seeing an incredible surge here. The possibility of having an international sensors manufacturing capacity here in Central Florida, with University of Central Florida taking the lead. I know Mr. Charlie Gray and his team has taken a real advancement in that. You've got Medical City, you've got a lot of things to diversify. But one thing Tax Watch has learned in that our tourism is not the cyclical basis it once was. Heck, the breakers in Palm Beach used to be closed, shuttered until for months at a time. And now, of course, some 30, maybe only the last 30, 35 years, it's year round. So we have all kinds of different kinds of ecotourism and things like that. So Florida's actually cycle, if you will, is half that of the rest of the nation. For 85 visitors to Florida creates a new job. And there's actually some diversification to it. But the most important thing is, I think what we have to do is say, look, we want to make sure Florida is not only a great place for the 100 million tourists, that become 102, 103 million, see some reasonable growth that we can handle, but also that we make the residents happy too. You can't have that imbalance. I think for a while we had some imbalance where we weren't building necessary infrastructure, roads, bridges, and the like. But when you look at who produces value in terms of the cost of directing state and local government services, generally the visitors, the cost factors in Florida government are prisons, university education, particularly medical educations, Medicaid, and student services. So by definition, tourists and visitors don't enjoy this. So what we really want to do is, we know the tourists that spend the most money are those that fly internationally. They come here, they stay longer, spend more money per day. So part of it is to make sure that we build and continue to grow the infrastructure, not only the roads, bridges, the airports, our capacity, our seaports, and all those things that allow not only the visitors to enjoy, but the residents as well. So there's a better balance, because either way, you can't really have imbalance for too long. Remember right after 9/11, I mean, there was a lot of clamor before September 11, 2001 that we had an imbalance. Mm-hmm. And then when we had 9/11, you could take a bowling ball and roll it down Miami Beach and not hit anybody for a couple of blocks.
Probably the same with iDrive.
Right, same thing, yeah, right after 9/11.
Yeah.
So we know the importance of them, but you got to also make sure that we make this a really wonderful place to live, that we don't get the kind of congestion, traffic jams that you see in large cities, LA and Atlanta and some other places. I know we go down to, one thing, Tax Watch has a Center for Competitive Florida, and it's chaired by former U.S. Senator George Lemieux. We're looking at the kind of congestion you see down in Brickell Avenue, Miami, and Biscayne Boulevard. I mean, all the condos, everything, and the roadways, it's just not there. It's going to be nothing but just jammed up infrastructure problems. So we've got to begin to think more innovatively and begin to have different ways of providing that kind of infrastructure, including potable water, internet, and things of that nature. So it's thinking long term, but you either grow forward or you move backwards. You almost never stay the same. So it's finding that right balance between the visitors and the tourists that call Florida home.
You mentioned the sensor manufacturing center in Osceola County. I just wanted to clarify something. Governor Scott vetoed some seed money for that. That was not on the Tax Watch turkey list.
Correct, it was not. It went through the process. It was actually vetted in the full Senate. Besides the vetting, we actually were fortunate enough to have read the material behind it, the thinking that went through it. It was very, very well thought through. I think it would truly be kind of a hub that will create. But the problem is, it doesn't fit the normal economic development programs that we currently have, because it's basically building the manufacturing infrastructure that would help bring other manufacturing companies. It's not a giveaway to any individual company, but to build the capacity to build whole manufacturing processes for sensors and things of that nature. The opportunity for that is enormous, and it is $10 million that would have done a lot of good. And I believe that the folks behind it will find a way to move forward on it, because I think the opportunities are too great, not only for Central Florida, but I actually think for the state of Florida, if not the Southeast region and the nation as a whole.
Last year's regular session, or the session earlier this year, the last regular session, got bogged down in a dispute over whether or not to take money through the Affordable Care Act and expand health coverage. The shorthand is Medicaid expansion, but actually the Senate plan was to allow people to use the money to buy private insurance. Had Tax Watch taken a position on that?
Here's what we did. No, we did not, Paul. And the reason is we looked at it very carefully, and I saw this about 2 years ago become a stalemate or a virtual food fight. And we said, look, unless we have some new information to provide that we can be instructive or constructive, it will only be seen as being, just building on top of stuff or destructive. So we said, what else can we do, the Tax Watch can do, to play in constructive and informative role that would improve access, reduce costs, and improve outcomes in healthcare? We said there's really two major areas. One is telehealth or telemedicine, and we're hosting a conference tomorrow. Florida Tax Watch is hosting a conference tomorrow at it's the Westin in Orlando at Universal Boulevard, which is looking at the policy behind it. It almost passed the session had they not gotten stuck with the House leaving 3 or 4 days early. We had every reason to believe that we had the House and Senate leaders were going to pass it. So after passing it, we think telehealth offers tremendous opportunity of improving health outcomes, providing area not only rural but also particularly for senior citizens. We have to make sure we get the reimbursement right, so it's not taken advantage of. It's not adding unnecessary costs, but it's being done properly, where we get the best medical care to Floridians and save costs. The other one is improving what we call scope of practice. In bureaucratic systems where only a typesetter can only do typesetting in the printing business, we have nurses, RNs, LPNs, advanced nurse practitioners, who in other states have a lot more professionally with that they've been trained to do, but there are laws and regulations in Florida that prevent them. So we want to be able to have a responsible expansion, an appropriate expansion of the scope of practice, so that they can practice what they're proficiently prepared to do in a healthy, the proper supervision of the right kind of doctor or medical specialist as well. So those two things are ways we said, hey, this is actually going to improve outcomes, control costs, and ultimately improve the health and safety and the health care of Floridians. So we said, let's get in some space where we can make a real difference and avoid this political food fight. So we thought that was a value-added, constructive contribution.
On telehealth, which state or states are the models that Florida should be looking to?
I'm really not sure. I'm not. I can get back to you on that, but I really don't know. I wish I could tell you.
Yeah,
I'm usually pretty good at it, but if I don't know it, I just doesn't come to the top of my head.
The question is, would we be at the cutting edge of this, or are we catching up with a lot of other states?
We're absolutely catching up. We're one of the last states. Yeah. But part of it is too, sometimes pilgrims, they have one thing notable, they have arrows in the back. So we want to make sure, I'm told now that Texas and California are two of the states, obviously very large states, two larger than Florida, that are far more advanced than Florida. But we are behind the pack. But Florida's a very innovative state. So we have a lot of concentration of healthcare that we didn't have 20 years ago.
Right.
I mean, look at Medical City.
Yeah.
And what's happened there. It's an incredible opportunity. We have a lot of local philanthropy. I know the Bush Charitable Foundation is very, very involved in promoting that, and others. We have many in Cleveland Clinic, Mayo Clinic, and so on, so forth. So we've got a lot of wonderful things that are happening in that space. So I think once we catch up, we can really excel because we can learn from their mistakes as well.
Mm-hmm.
But every year we delay, we believe that of the $100 billion that's spent in healthcare in Florida, we're losing at least 1, if not 2%. That's $1 or $2 billion a year that the private sector is losing in terms of added unnecessary costs, not to mention quality healthcare, lost days at work, and lost productivity.
And the fact that Texas and California are setting the pace is significant considering how different those two states are. That would tell you that this is not necessarily a partisan policy.
It's clearly not. I mean, we have the technology. What we have to do is make sure that we have laws that are consistent, that allow for it thoughtfully, that encourage the right kind of regulations. You need regulations, but the right kind of regulations. And also we want to make sure that we get the reimbursement correct, that we properly reimburse doctors and medical professionals responsibly, so that we just don't make it excessive either. So we can learn from other states' trials and errors, which is a good thing, but it's time to act. Mm-hmm. It's long overdue, and it will improve the outcomes for Floridians. And we've got some great House and Senate leaders that are taking charge of this, and I think 2016 will see that happen.
Great. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. Before we wrap it up, I just wanted to give you the opportunity if there was something we didn't talk about or we could get to briefly before we wrap it up.
I really think that Florida's on the cusp of some incredible things. I think we've got to make sure that we really integrate our universities into the whole second, third stage business investments. I think we're really doing a great job to educate people and getting them college degrees and graduate degrees. I think we've got to do a better job of making sure that at the same time we have the residencies, the internships, and the job placements that follow those students, follow those young professionals, so that when they graduate, the millions and hundreds of millions of dollars of investment that your readers, your listeners make each year, that they stay in Florida, that they become medical doctors, they become professionals, engineers, architects, as much as possible in Florida. We can't afford to educate the world. This is not Harvard, this is not Princeton. University of Central Florida, University of Florida, Florida State University, and others. It's a state university system. We need to make sure we reap the benefit of a medical education over $1 million. Why should we have that student go off to Los Angeles or to Chicago? I mean, we have great needs in our own state of medical personnel. So we have to do a better job of making sure we align the first residencies and internships and job opportunities associated with that. And I think we'll have better alignment, better integration, create real value.
Right. Well, Dominic Calabro of Florida Tax Watch, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you.